Sorry, James, what were you asking?
I was just saying, are you going to be at any EUC events or general events in 2024?
So I was just at CES a
Oh,
couple
yeah.
weeks ago. Yeah, that was interesting. Saw a couple interesting things. I don't know if you've heard of that Rabbit device. It's like a AI
Okay,
companion.
what is this thing?
So
I'm going,
it,
I have a phone. It could not be an app.
yeah, no, I think it could be an app. I think the reason, so for those that haven't seen the Rabbit device, it's basically this little small, almost kind of like an iPod size device that's got a couple of buttons on it. One of them to like, it doesn't have listen always mode. So you have to push the button to actually get it to listen to you, but you just speak natural language into it. And then it sends off your query to an AI LLM or potentially multiple AI LLMs and then returns a response back. And it's been getting a lot of flack because like, well, couldn't this just be an app or couldn't Apple or Google or whomever do it in their phone? The answer is yes, they could. They just kind of haven't yet. But you know, it's an interesting device. I mean, the hardware is like 199 bucks, so it's pretty cheap.
Mm,
But I think, you know, to make or break a technology like that, the response time has to be really, really good. Like the latency between the time you ask a question and you get a response has to be really fast. And I've seen mixed, you know, feedback on that.
mm.
Some people say it's really quick. Some people say it takes, you know, several seconds or more to get a response back. And if that's the case, that's just not really that useful.
Yeah, because like I have ChatGPT, the app on my phone, and I can
Yeah,
talk to that if I so choose. So what would
exactly.
be I just
I
when I
think
heard
I
about it, I
think
was a
the
bit
argument
confused.
the argument with Rabbit, besides being the, you know, speak to the LLM all the time to ask questions, rather than open your phone, unlock your phone, open ChatGPT, and then ask a question. So it's a little bit more seamless.
Sure.
But I think the other reason for it is they're pushing this notion that, you know, there's lots of rich capability wrapped up inside of applications, but it's annoying if you have to try to like book travel or something like that, that you have to open up, you know, an airline app and you have to open up a hotel app and you have to open up a car rental app and all these things. And their argument is that they're going to be providing this stitching between LLMs and then allowing the LLM to take a set of actions. Because right now with ChatGPT and a lot of other AI LLMs, they can give you results or answers about things like, hey, plan me a trip to Rome for 2 weeks, whatever. They can give you a whole itinerary, airfare, estimations, whatever. But the LLMs typically don't let you take action and go and do things like make reservations and do all those kind of things. So the argument for Rabbit is they have all these connectors and they can actually automate the underlying
Hmm.
back ends of these applications. Now,
Ah, okay.
it,
Okay.
it, it
So
demos well at CES. The question is, how does it work in the real world?
yeah. So kind of
Let
like,
me
yeah,
just
go on.
put a pin in that just a second and go back to it. But we've got a large number of people already on. Let me tell the folks that are seeing what they're seeing, what they're seeing. Um, the Liquidware Unplugged format is that you get to know us for a few minutes before we actually start the formal conversation. So you could hear us discuss anything like we're currently discussing. Shawn had brought up this Rabbit AI device. And so as we get closer in the next 10 minutes, we'll start the formal discussion today. But right now you're getting to see us, and I may jump in a second and say the same thing in a minute. But welcome, and we're glad that you're with us.
Go on. Shawn Massey just said that sounds like Concur with an AI. Nobody wants Concur with an AI. No, sorry.
Well, as I said, it demoed well. You know, I think the truth will be told when people get it in their hands and try it out. I mean, the interesting thing is they only had, I think, 10,000 of those devices in the initial production. They've sold out of the first batch. They sold out of the second batch. Like the item's pretty hot. Now,
Well, you
again,
know, Diamond Rio was very successful too as an MP3 player.
the Zune was a big hit, and then
Yeah.
it wasn't.
Right. And no, I joke. It could go that direction, like you said. It could be eclipsed by simply an app and a few things on an Android or an iPhone device. It sounds like, but that sounds
Yeah.
very, very interesting. they know. I'm sure they're looking over their shoulder, I would guess.
Oh, hey, there's a question here that somebody asked about the Rabbit R1 versus the Humane pin. So I don't know if you guys have seen the Humane pin, but it's this wearable
We
device
saw that
that
awful demo video, of those really wooden people. Yep, saw that.
they're former Apple people, and I think they're trying to be Steve Jobs, but just not quite really hitting that out of the park. But yeah, Humane is meant to be a similar device like Rabbit, where you have it on you at all times and you can speak to it and ask questions. Where I think that pin sort of like fails a bit is it's intended to always be in listening mode. You don't have to necessarily trigger it, and that freaks some people out, I think, in terms of privacy and all those kind of things. But also, like, it doesn't really have a display other than it projects a little image onto your hand, which, you know, I don't know how useful that's going to be. You can't really interact with the image. You can just see data projected onto your hand. I'm not sure if that's the mode that's really going to work that well. The Rabbit device, interestingly enough, does have a small sized touchscreen on it. So after you ask a question, you can actually see results on a display. You can have it read out to you, obviously, but you can see the results on a screen. And then if you have to make a selection, you can actually just touch the screen to pick different options. So I feel like that format is probably more useful than the Humane pin, where it's only voice or projecting an image onto your hand. I think Humane does let you tap into your hand to choose things, but it just feels a bit like BlackBerry-ish in an era of iPhones in terms of like the interface. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah.
Yeah.
What's the price point? So. Did you say?
I think Humane is pretty expensive. I want to say it's like $500 or $600. It's pricey.
Yeah, I think it was something like that. And then didn't they say the first model was due out in March? And then I believe so. They had a workforce reduction already, if I remember correctly, as well. So doesn't bode well. So
yeah.
Great. Well, we just a reminder, we're in Liquidware Unplugged mode today with this webinar, and this is fun because the participants on the panel that you see here across the top, we didn't have to submit slides, so it's a fun webinar for us to do too. It's a talk show is basically what we're looking at. We're going to be talking about what's ahead in EUC for 2024. We usually have this banter about for the first few minutes, and in about just the next couple of minutes, we'll get into the more formal discussion. But I guess we could say where we're joining from today. I'm in the Alpharetta, Georgia area where Liquidware does have an office, but I've been working at home way before the pandemic. And James?
Sure. It's evening time here. I'm in Dublin in Ireland. So I've been working at Liquidware for about the past year. So, and I've been completely remote, obviously, because our main office is in Alpharetta, as Jason said.
Shawn, where are you joining us from today?
I am in Playa del Carmen, Mexico right now.
Nice.
And it is a beautiful, sunny 80-degree day, which is awesome. Because the last 3 or 4 days has been crazy, cloudy and rainy. Not awesome because I'm inside instead of being out in the sun.
I've seen Playa del Carmen out the window of the Walmart. I heard described this week as the Walmart on water, a Carnival cruise ship a couple of decades ago, and they dropped off for an excursion there before we went on to Cozumel for the day.
Yeah, Cozumel is just across. It's a little island just across from Playa del Carmen. So where I'm staying, you can kind of walk to the beach in about 2 minutes, and you can see Cozumel just off the coast. There's a ferry that runs back and forth, gets you there, pretty quickly. Ironically, I've been coming to Playa del Carmen for probably 10 years. I've never been to Cozumel. Not sure why, just haven't made it a priority. And sadly, and people will probably be angry at me for this, but I've never gone to see Chichen Itza, which is the Mayan kind of ruins. It's about a 2.5-hour bus ride out from Playa or Cancun, and I really should see it because it's one of those kind of classic landmark must see places. I just haven't prioritized it, so shame on me.
Plenty of time. And Kristen, you visited that area, Cozumel, last year.
Yeah, I was in Cozumel last year for spring break. And that was also where we went for our honeymoon. So I
nice.
love Cozumel. It's A lot of fun.
Fact of the day, but you're not joining us from there today. You're in a cooler spot, right?
I am not. I am not in 80-degree weather. I am in Chicago, where it is icy and sleet. They call it a wintry mix here of sleet, rain, snow, everything, all of the above.
I grew up in Chicago, spent most of my life there, so I feel you.
So you're familiar.
There's a reason I moved from Chicago to
Yes.
Houston. It was to escape the winter. Although I find it funny that I traded terribly cold winters for terribly hot summers. I mean, the summer
Yes.
last year in Houston was just brutal. We had like 100 days of over 100-degree temperature, and most of them over 110. Like, it was just awful.
Yeah, that is not fun. You're not going outside in the summer, and we're not going outside in the winter.
Exactly. Exactly.
So let's move on into formal introductions, and we'll go back through this. Kristen, you're the host for today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, I'm Kristen McGargle, Senior Marketing Manager with Liquidware, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, EUC Liquidware Unplugged, an insight into what lies ahead in 2024. This webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions, you can place it in the Q&A or chat feature, and we will address it as time allows. And you'll receive a link to this recording within a few business days. Today we have EUC luminary Shawn Bass, and also Citrix user group leader and CTA James O'Regan, and Liquidware VP of Product Marketing and Alliances Jason E. Smith. And we will discuss the current state of EUC. Jason, do you want to get us started?
Yes, thanks. These, like I said earlier, the Liquidware Unplugs are a fun format. We introduced them when we felt like the world would start working from home. And you know what year that was, and you know the reason behind it. I don't have to say those things. We don't like to even hear those words anymore, I don't think. But it's been a very fun format going forward, as we've all returned to work and work in a new way a lot of times. But so we've continued it. And today's topic is we're highly interactive in this format. We encourage questions from the audience, just like you saw Shawn Massey participating earlier, and we may call out a few people that we know and love in the industry, and a few people that we may not know yet, but we'd be happy to. So please do participate with us through questions there. We'll have a couple of poll questions that are coming up. And today's topic is about what lies ahead in 2024 for EUC. We're going to recap some of the things that happened in EUC. But as we start to do that, I'll go ahead and list those off actually, and then we'll ask the poll question. So I was going through a summary of many of the highlights of what happened in the news, and maybe if I miss one or two, anybody can call me out and correct me. That's the format of today. But I've got about 6 things that I'd like to recap that I think we all lived through, and we'd be surprised. I think you'd be surprised to hear that most of these happened either at the end of the very previous year or in mainly 2023. They had an impact. But Amazon Workspaces and then Workspaces Core, Core came into play, saying that Amazon Workspaces Core is the more or less the infrastructure that Workspaces have been built around, that Citrix and VMware and solutions like that could support. I think WorkSpot's on that list too, and maybe a couple others, LeoStream named off. So that impacted the industry. Along those same lines, it was also learned later in the year, I think around July or August, that Workspaces and Workspaces Core customers could run Office 365 in the cloud on those platforms. And that was a departure in what they'd previously said, that you basically had to be on Azure to run Office in the cloud. I mean, Office on the desktop rather than rely on Office in the cloud is what I want to specify there. So it gave customers another key option in not having to be on Azure. This could still be on, in this case, the named Amazon Workspaces and Workspaces Core would also be supported. No other clouds, I understand, were announced in that support announcement. I think it may have come out in blogs rather than in a press release. Broadcom obviously finished their acquisition of VMware, and then in short notice said that the EUC unit would soon be, well, I'll use the word standalone, be spun off. And there's uncertainty about that still going on right now, and we hear rumors that something might even be named here in short order of what may happen to that, and we can speculate that in a moment as we get into the discussion. Citrix and Cloud Software Group, that happened towards the end of October of 22, but Citrix went through many changes, streamlining as they described, and also coming back around and saying, you know what, maybe we rotated a little bit toward cloud only and cloud first too hard. We support hybrid, and we saw them re-embrace CVAD and on-prem and actually build those out in some cases. Some knowledge I have there from speaking to some of the product managers. Microsoft continued their AVD and Windows 365 marching forward. Windows 365 continued to turn heads because it was a new offering. And messaging from leaders like VMware and Citrix talked about how they could run in those scenarios as well. And I think I said 6, but I combined 2 already with the Amazon Workspaces Core and the Office 365 being able to run on those. And then Digital Frame also. That may have happened the previous year, but their messaging came forward, and even is still coming forward this week of how they're operating and how they have easy trials, and they have already have a quite loyal following. So it'd be interesting to see how that acquisition of Digital acquiring Frame plays out in the year ahead. Guys, let's go ahead and put the poll question up, and then I'll ask, did I miss anything? So James and Shawn. But
no, I think that covers it.
Let's put up the poll question.
I've got one.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's run the poll, and then I'll say which it is.
Okay. So we got 2 poll questions back to back to kind of help us set the discussion. What platform are you mainly on today? Is the question in there? I know that you might be hybrid across a couple of these, but if you had to weigh it out for you and make a decision in there, the main one that you're on or plan to be on, in short order, check that off. And as we get this one done, we'll move to the second one, and don't put it up yet, Kristen, but we'll also be asking, do you plan to make a big switch? So here's the first one. Kristen gets to see how fast we're getting responses there, and
we are 68% have participated.
Big number, because we have a big number on today. So vote quickly, if you will. And maybe you're a physical desktop environment. This was specifically about VDI and DAS. I know the topic of the very title says VDI, but it's VDI/DAS multi-session.
Okay, I'm going to share the results.
Interesting.
That's similar to what I would have thought.
Yeah.
AVD's creeping ahead a little bit.
Should frame that and do it again next year. We should take a screenshot of this and then run this poll question again next year and do a side-by-side comparison.
I'll take a little photo of this.
Yeah, there's significant, I won't say exactly how many people we have on today, but there's a significant number of people on, and I trust, these numbers get easier to trust the larger you have on, so.
Okay. Ready for
James?
Yeah, and then the second one, do you plan to make a change? Yeah, and it's a simple yes or no question, and we'll put that one up now. So while people are having time to answer that question, James, what maybe did I leave out?
Okay, it was under AWS as well. AWS launched a thin client. Who thought we'd see a platform vendor launching a thin client, an enterprise thin client? I thought that was a big one for me towards the end of 2023. So
yeah, we heard a rumor of that in a call that, well, it wasn't a rumor. They kind of told us beforehand in a private call, and we speculated what could that be in-house, and after, I guess it wasn't too much of an epiphany, but I was like, their Fire TV devices probably have enough horsepower these days. But that's what it is, right? It's their top-end Fire TV device that's
it's the Fire Cube, as far as I remember. Yeah,
which has enough horsepower on it to put it in the realm of other thin client devices, and it runs, like I said, a different firmware, one specially flashed just for thin clients, I understand. Well, this one's interesting too. A significant number says they plan to switch. I guess I could have asked a follow-up one that said, why do you plan to switch? But I think we may we may have an idea of the answer, and that's some of the area we can get into. Will you leave that up just a little bit, Kristen? I'm going to take a screenshot of that myself in case I forget what it is. And if you do, maybe we can refer back to the number anyhow. Thank you. All right. So
just before we go on, Jason, we've got a question. So does Liquidware know if the VDI platform numbers compare closely to their customer base? I'll let you answer that one.
It basically looked like Citrix and VMware are kind of split evenly, and then Microsoft was trailing a close third, and then Workspaces behind that.
I think I would mention, I would say percentage-wise, very close. Very close. I think we're seeing an increase here at Liquidware on Citrix accounts these days, but we long had, we first had the VMware Horizon following, and in the last year, maybe we've seen an increase in Citrix accounts. But yeah, that would mirror our customer base, I do believe. But we have far more on. I can even look through the names today and see that we have far more people on than just our customer base alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and thank you for that one. So let's get right to it. Shawn, some of these trends that we saw, and you're coming off fresh, not too long ago. When was it that you were last with VMware?
March of 2023, so coming up on 1 year.
Do you have an interesting perspective, in at least some of the VMware subjects that I named off? What are some of the thoughts on where EUC as a whole may be headed, and trends that we may be seeing in the year ahead?
Oh, okay.
That's an open-ended question, wasn't it?
So I guess if we're going to try to stick loosely to the framework of what you had previously called out as the set of questions, I'm assuming that you're asking specifically about the Broadcom acquired VMware EUC is going to be spun off. What does that mean for the future? I think I've not been there in almost a year, so I'm certainly not privy to any conversations that are happening inside of VMware. But what I've been observing, sort of publicly, threads on Reddit, things on Twitter, that kind of stuff, it definitely seems like there's a growing dissatisfaction with VMware as a whole, and I'll get to what this means to EUC in a moment. But a lot of people saying that they're looking for alternatives to VMware because of some of the changes that Broadcom has instituted. Now, whether or not that's a passive aggressive, like, oh, I'm going to do something, this is BS, whatever, and then they're not necessarily going to act on it, I don't know. I think some people trivialize the complexity of replatforming a data center from one provider to another. I'll give you guys an example. I was talking with a large retail organization that has thousands of stores that had engaged in a partnership with Microsoft to evacuate their data center and move everything to Azure over a 4-year span. And this was like a multi-billion-dollar partnership deal that they had done. This particular retailer had somewhere in the neighborhood of around 4,000 servers virtualized on VMware that they were going to migrate. Now, their plan was not to do a lift and shift. Their plan was to modernize and replatform to cloud native, which is the right answer. It's also the more expensive, more time-consuming answer. But I had met with this customer while I was still at VMware, about 1.5 to 2 years into that journey. And it wasn't an EUC related meeting. I was just meeting with the heads of IT there to talk about, trends and where they're investing in the future and what VMware could do for them. And of course, their initial response was, well, VMware can't do anything for me because I'm leaving your platform. We're moving to Azure. We had this big thing we announced. We're moving it all to the cloud, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, I'm just curious, how's the migration going? I'm just, any pitfalls, anything I might be able to help you with and assisting with the migration, whatever. And the guy flat out tells me, like, 1.5 to 2 years into the migration, they've migrated about 250 of 4,000 hosts. And I was just like, this project's not going to complete on time. There's no chance you're going to get this done in the next remaining 2 years, 2.5 years. And it was not just this retailer's IT staff that was all working on it. They had an outsourced consulting provider that was helping them with their application modernization, and they still had only accomplished 250 hosts out of 4,000. That's an abysmal result, and likely someone was going to get fired over that, and some contracts were going to be renegotiated or refunded or something, because that's just, but my point is, when people say I'm going to re-platform everything from one vendor to another, this is not like a quick, easy project for data center transformation. If you're doing lift and shift, and by the way, lift and shift is not the best solution, but it's the quickest solution. If you were to take an on-premises VMware environment and move to VMware Cloud on AWS, you can literally push button migrate a whole bunch of hosts. It doesn't work for everything, but you can migrate a significant number of VMs in a very short period of time. I've realized that that's not the optimal design that you're after, but if you're trying to vacate a data center to get it done in like 12, 18 months, you got to look for the easy button and then retool when you're in the new environment. And some people say, oh, no, you should re-architect and retool your applications. It's like, well, how much time and money do you have? Because that's very difficult to do. Now,
do you think I'm being Captain Obvious by thinking that's what Broadcom and Cloud Software Group are counting on?
That's exactly what they're counting on. They're exactly what they're counting on, that people, and well, there's two things I think Broadcom is counting on. Number one is that it's very difficult and time consuming to move from one platform to the next. You can move segments of your environment and modernize certain applications, but to migrate thousands of hosts to the public cloud is, a 5+ year endeavor and many, many millions of dollars. It's very difficult to do. And that's even if you've got the vendor helping you, or even if you've got a consulting provider helping you, it's just time and money. So they're counting on that. The other thing they're counting on is in the on-premises data center space, there are really not a lot of good, legitimate alternatives to VMware today. The closest legitimate alternative is probably Nutanix, with the Acropolis hypervisor and a lot of the features they have there. There really isn't a lot of other providers out there that are near feature parity to what VMware has. There's Proxmox, there's Oracle, there's a whole bunch of other kind of one-off solutions, but none of them are near feature complete compared to VMware. I mean, Microsoft's deprecated Hyper-V. There is, of course, a new Azure Stack offering, but Microsoft's been at Azure Stack for I can't tell you how many years, and they still have very, very small adoption. Maybe that's going to change. Maybe they're going to invest more. Maybe customers are going to move to it. But I think the provider that has the most to gain if customers do move away from VMware would be Nutanix, because they have the most complete on-prem offering. That's if a customer wants to stay on-prem. If they're going to make a move to the public cloud, they can do that. But if you've got 3 more years on your VMware contract, you better be working every single day of the next 3 years, moving things to the public cloud, because it's very tough to do.
I'd agree with you on the back. That covers the back office side. Do you think that same conversation and thought process could be mirrored on the front, where you have Citrix EUC and VMware EUC?
Yeah. So for
and things like that. Yeah.
For the EUC space, I think it's a little bit different. I think it will vary depending on the size of the organization or the use cases inside the organization. So I say this often, if you're a small mid-market company, you can probably satisfy most of your requirements with AVD, Amazon Workspaces, any of the kind of public cloud DaaS offerings pretty easily. That doesn't mean it's necessarily easy to migrate, but if your use cases are simple, if you either have a small number of users or a small number of apps, the combinations and permutations of apps used by users, you can probably move to the public cloud pretty easily. If you've got 1,000 workers that all do the same thing, they're call center workers, or they're, data entry operators or something like that. They use 5 applications. Like, that's a perfect use case that can move to cloud very easily. If you are a large bank with 100,000, 200,000 employees, and you've got a portfolio of apps that's in the 2,000, 3,000 range, moving those people to public cloud versus on-prem VDI is going to be tough. And it's tough because the tools and technologies used to manage large-scale VDI are pretty lacking in the public cloud DaaS providers in terms of how you slipstream unique applications in personalized desktops for users, how you manage different image types, how you manage entitlements of different users to different resources, how you control security policies, access policies for virtual desktops in the public cloud DaaS providers are somewhat limited. I'm talking about the cloud native providers. Citrix and VMware and others have had very robust access policy engines and very robust application delivery and personalization technology. Obviously, Liquidware has got value-added tools there that can help customers. But to do it on naked AVD or naked Amazon workspaces, it may be a little challenging for those large, complex environments.
100% agree with you. I was having a customer conversation last week with a large healthcare implementation running Horizon, and their executives were looking very hard at AVD. And the more I talk to them about their use case, they ask, well, is that what you guys are seeing in Liquidware? Are you seeing more organizations move towards AVD or AVD and Nerdio, something that is combined, or AVD, Nerdio, and Liquidware to get to have a solution to go to other than Horizon, or let's not just pick on VMware, let's say Citrix as well. And my honest response was, we see it in the easier use cases, what you said. It doesn't mean it's a small use case. Could be offshore call center that has 1,000 people in it, but only 3 or 4 apps. That's an easy use case for an Amazon Workspaces. That's an easier use case for AVD. Maybe not Windows 365 in that exact scenario, but those things that I think of things of VDI 1.0. What was the first use cases we saw 2009 and 10 and 11 going towards VDI, and it was those types of use cases until we got more mature, and the things that we needed to make non-persistent desktops work appropriately and make applications come back in, and all the things that you would need in a very robust and in a very complex enterprise that had knowledge workers in it. That's the reason why your VDI maybe didn't even come yet, we could argue, but that we're seeing that mirrored with DaaS. We're seeing that mirrored with multi-session as well, as those use cases will come as they're built out. And my advice to the healthcare customer we had last week was, you would be at the forefront for knowledge workers going to a solution set like AVD right now. That doesn't mean that AVD is slow to adopt right now. No, you've got your use cases that are coming in, but you would be one of the people at the forefront, and you could, of course, I gave us a plug. You could mitigate risk by having Liquidware in there and bring in that user persistency into there and controlling the DEX environment and all that to make that logical move with you, because it comes back to migrating. How fast can you migrate, and can you leave things intact, like the user authored data and the user experience across all those environments? And that's where we help. So it was a shameless plug for us, but my advice back to them was, you might want to proceed with caution. Look at which areas you could move first yet.
Yeah, I think the answer, Jason, is there are lots of customers in the thousands and tens of thousand seats that have migrated to AVD or are moving to AVD. Now, that being said, to do AVD at large scale in a complex environment, you do have to roll up your sleeves and do quite a bit of your own scripting, automation, orchestration to manage AVD at that scale. That's the reason why vendors like Nerdio exist, because some customers are not willing to build out the level of scripting and automation necessary to control AVD at that scale effectively. So, I mean, there's 2 paths. If your organization has a big enough engineering organization, you may be willing to take on that responsibility of building your own automation for pool management and power management and entitlement and all that kind of stuff, and do it all your own through the scripting with the APIs and PowerShell that are available in AVD. Other customers might look to that and say, we're better off just adding a third-party tool, whether that's a Nerdio on naked AVD or whether that's a Citrix or VMware to solve for those management complexities. And then, the application delivery bits, you guys have an application layering technology. Citrix and VMware have their own. Like, those are going to be the things that you're going to need in a large scale environment to manage it for a complex set of applications or use cases. AVD does have MSIX, app attached, that kind of stuff. MSI App Attach has been out there for years, and I still have not seen large customer adoption of it due to compatibility of apps and that kind of stuff. And there's varying claims out there. I've heard some people say 60% app compat. I've heard others say 90% app compat. Obviously, I think it's going to depend on your apps, but if you can't get to the threshold of it being useful enough for enough of your applications, then you're going to have an alternative application delivery solution. So can AVD work in those places? Yes. You might need to add a Citrix or a VMware or a Liquidware or somebody else to help you get to solve those complex issues.
Yeah, and we're seeing embracement too. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, no, it was a comment from someone, and they were talking about AVD, and they were talking about the rate of innovation, and I was actually thinking about that and thinking it's like it's in some ways it is innovation from a Microsoft perspective, but they're playing catch up to where Citrix and VMware have been for years. Because I've seen some of these features, it's like, okay, that's okay. That may be innovation from your perspective, but if we look at a Citrix VMware world, we've had that for years. So it's all about perception of where Microsoft are as opposed to where they actually are. And then I suppose what's your view on that, Shawn?
It's a flashback to the old 2003 terminal services bear paw, where Microsoft was going to build all the features that Citrix had and put them out of business, and then it never happened. It's the same kind of thing. Now, Microsoft is going to build the things that they need to build to be able to capture customer interest, where customers are saying, we can't use AVD because you don't have ABC feature. And that's their right to do, and they're going to do that. And I think that AVD will continue to become more competitive. That will make it a harder decision between, is AVD good enough? Do I need a Citrix or VMware? I think that margin is continuing to compress, and it's going to force Citrix and VMware to continue to find new ways to innovate to stay ahead. I think the two biggest things that have helped Microsoft dramatically, and you could argue whether or not these things are Microsoft technology advantages or just Microsoft muscle advantages, but making multi-session Windows client an Azure only feature gives Microsoft an unfair competitive advantage against everybody else. Citrix and VMware can take advantage of Windows 11 multi-session, but only on top of Azure. So that gives Microsoft a huge advantage of customers moving to their platform because you can't get it anywhere else. And the cost economics of Windows 10, Windows 11 multi-session are much better than traditional VDI. So that's a ball in their court. The other thing, without hesitation, is the October 2019 licensing changes that occurred that basically said, if you are using a listed provider, aka AWS, Google, IBM, Alibaba, whomever, GCP, you have to buy a second copy of Windows to run it in the public cloud. And you can't run Office 365 in a supported capacity in non-Azure. And I shouldn't say that. They actually named Azure as a listed provider, but then they also added Azure hybrid use benefits. So it's kind of like they excluded themselves, but then also included themselves. So it's a little wonky, but there's no doubt that October 2019 licensing change made a huge vacuum of customers who were considering alternative public cloud providers to choose Azure because they need the solution to be supported. And if Microsoft makes it cheaper, most customers are going to choose the cheaper path.
Do you think we'll see that challenged? And I suspect maybe the whole Office on Amazon or in Google and things like that, where you couldn't have it in there until recently with Amazon being the only sanctioned one outside of Azure. Do you think we'll see the same thing challenged for multi-session, either by the EU or someone like that? What do you think?
It's possible. I think the reason why you're seeing it for Office so quickly is it became such a hot button item for a lot of customers that were voicing their displeasure with Microsoft's decision. Multi-session, it's a nice to have, but I don't think there's enough customers that say this is a make or break. We have to have it. So I think the pressure is off multi-session, so to speak. But Office 365 was a do or die issue for a lot of customers. They had to have support. Now, keep in mind, the only place that has been publicly announced that's been endorsed is the Amazon Workspace's Office 365 deal. As far as I know, all other listed providers still have the same restriction. A lot of this is coming through pressure from the European Union and the European Commission. You know, there was a number of articles that came out over the last 2-3 years related to Microsoft's, you know, competitive cloud pricing licensing agreements that a lot of European cloud providers, OVH and others, have basically said this is killing our business. And it's funny, there's a graph that was released. This is probably like a year or two, maybe even 3 years ago, of market share by cloud providers. And European cloud providers went like this as Azure went like that. So it became pretty clear that Microsoft's ads were at the expense of their European cloud providers. And of course, that's been something that is a lot of the reason why this mounting pressure has happened the last few years.
Yeah. You touched on MSIX earlier, and something I wanted to go back because it was something that we'd planned to discuss today if it came up, and we see that too. You know, we're not going to be shy here. FlexApp serves that need to go beyond MSIX. We don't compete with it per se because it has its limitations. Our customers run into it relatively quickly around, and they claim around the 30 to 40% rate. And I'd say if you don't have Tim Mangan on staff, you're probably stuck somewhere around that rate, or at least you've been to a lot of his classes and learned his tips and tricks and has the tools to get beyond that. Do you see VMware App Volumes, FlexApp answering that need broader across the industry? Was it really something there that you saw when you're at VMware with App Volume stepping into that gap, the same way that we step into that gap with FlexApp?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of different, you know, third parties that have their own application layering technology that that can help quite a bit for the apps that would not normally be supported through MSIX. Now, I still think the ball's in Microsoft's court to invest more deeply in MSIX and fix this. I'm not optimistic that's going to happen because they've been at it for like 7-8 years, and there's been improvements. I don't want to say there's been no improvements. There's been improvements, but it's just not where it needs to be. But I do think the ball's in their court that if they wanted to fix this and get it right, they could if they apply the right resources to it. But at the moment, I think you know, third-party tooling is going to be the way to go to solve that.
You see, the main thing that we're really up against is vendors. If vendors worldwide that develop for Windows supported MSIX out of the box, it would be fixed in short order. But that's not happening. We don't see that movement. Do you have any thought behind why vendors don't develop for it first?
Again, I think it's because MSIX is just not where it needs to be at this point. It doesn't handle the number of things that the traditional MSI format handled, and I think until that happens, it's gonna lag adoption. Oh, hey, we got one other question in here that's specifically about Horizon. I wanna answer. So, question is, curious what your thoughts are on the prospects that the post-spin-off Horizon customers might need to pay for vSphere for the first time as always included. How might that affect customer product decisions? You know, having to pay for VCF or VVF going to make the TCO for Horizon much more expensive. So again, I don't have a crystal ball, and I haven't been at VMware for almost a year, but when I saw the article published in December from Broadcom's earnings that they were going to spin EUC off, one of the first things I thought about is, how is that cross-company relationship going to be managed if EUC is spun off into its own entity and it ends up getting acquired by a private equity company, which is probably the most likely outcome that will happen to end user compute. I really don't think it will end up at a Microsoft or Amazon or somewhere else. So it's going to go to a different private equity company. Now you're going to have a chunk of the end user compute portfolio, the Horizon piece, that is largely dependent on vSphere today. So how is that going to operate from a customer point of view? Is a customer going to buy Horizon with some type of a built-in OEM or SKU that's going to give them the vSphere for desktop use rights? Is Broadcom going to change pricing of that vSphere for desktop, you know, use right? Or is a customer going to have to do two different contracts, one contract with the EUC spinout and one contract with Broadcom? And then again, I'll go back to the point of what happens to the vSphere for desktop pricing. Does that go up? You know, what happens there? I think there's a lot of unknowns with what that's going to bring for Horizon cost of ownership. And I don't have answers. I don't know what's being discussed between the end user compute BU and the new potential company that would acquire them and what the existing Broadcom would do. I would say if there isn't some type of a deal put together where they can transparently sell vSphere for desktop as an OEM with the fixed price for some period of time, I think it's going to create a lot of friction in the industry when customers have to acquire Horizon with vSphere. Now, all of that being said, you guys probably remember years ago, we came out with support for Horizon for physical PC brokering. Obviously, on physical PCs, there's no vSphere underneath the Horizon agent. So there is operating modes where Horizon is decoupled from the vSphere hypervisor, and the video, keyboard, mouse, USB redirection, all that kind of stuff is baked into the agent. That's also true for Horizon Cloud on Azure because it's running Hyper-V underneath. So there's no dependency on vSphere there. So the EUC BU, when it spins out, could port the Horizon product to run on competitive solutions and not be dependent on vSphere. But I think by and large, for most customers, if they're running it on vSphere today, unless the price is obnoxious, they're going to keep running it on vSphere. They're not going to introduce another hypervisor just because it's cheaper, because then you got to change your whole data center operations model and everything else.
Interesting.
Yeah. That is,
so some of the decoupling work may have already been done, you're saying?
Yeah.
Just hidden, basically, or not brought to the forefront, of course.
Yep.
We had a question from Nate, said if you were going to build a VDI environment from scratch today to remain, I'm paraphrasing, to remain as open as you can be, to have your options open in the future, yet dependable, how would you build it out? I think that would be for Shawn.
So I think I would start first with the, is my goal to do this in the public cloud? Is my goal to do it on premises? Like what's the strategy there? And I would try to keep an eye towards what my options are to remain somewhat cloud agnostic. So even if I am going to use public cloud DAS, I would want to have some way of being able to shift that to another public cloud provider or be able to shift that back on premises if the prices start getting obnoxious and I need a quick, clean getaway. So I would either evaluate the pricing and cost optimization of one of the third-party providers like a Citrix or a VMware that would give me some flexibility to run across more than one public cloud. Or if I'm going to stick to a single public cloud, I would want to look for options that would give me some hybridity in the story. The Amazon Workspaces announcement that was done, Workspaces Core announcement that was done with VMware Horizon, that gave you that out or that opportunity to run hybrid. You could run inside Amazon Workspaces Core, but you could join that up to an existing on-prem environment with Horizon. So if you needed to move some workloads back on-prem, you could put them on-prem, users could get brokered. They would not know if they're in the cloud or on-prem. It's the same front-end interface, that kind of stuff. That gives you some flexibility. Likewise, a Citrix or a VMware Cloud or somebody like that lets you run across multiple different cloud providers. If you feel like things aren't going your way with AWS or Google or Azure, and you want to switch cloud providers, giving you that flexibility. In the Microsoft world with AVD, everything's 100% cloud. They do technically have Azure Stack HCI, but as I said, it's not really widely adopted today. So that's an option to pursue if you feel like you could be comfortable enough with Azure Stack HCI combined with Azure and AVD. That may be an option for you as well. But I would design for flexibility to try to avoid being squeezed too much on rising cloud costs.
I have to give us a plug in here too. It's why one of the reasons why we were built is that we go to great lengths to make sure every main desktop deployment method is supported. So when you hear us talk about Flex apps being packaged once, that's something that we have really put into practice with customers that have moved from, they may have hybrid, they may have more than one solution. They really honestly don't have to repackage that Flex app package. It's going to work in Windows. It worked in 7, it works in 10, it works in 11. It also works with Citrix, VMware, Amazon, and all the like. So if you think about it, when you decouple the profile, when you decouple user data, make sure all those things are mapped and brought in with user management, and then you're able to manage the apps also. Maybe that's MSIX and AppV, all those legacy things that Profile Unity can do. And then your apps that you've done with FlexApp don't have to be repackaged. It does mitigate the risk to a large degree, and the user sometimes they might see something as small as today, your desktop is actually no longer what you thought it was. There's a new shortcut that's been dropped off. It's Citrix, VMware, or whatever. Open that up. And when they open that up, the profile plays back, the apps come in, and we make those changes seamless. And so Liquidware solutions were built for a time such as this, what we're seeing in the industry. And we saw it. I didn't know if it could get any more hybrid than it did, but we've seen it incredibly get more and more hybrid in the last 2 or 3 years with the changes that have been made and the players that are coming up, like Digital Frame. WorkSpot's got a good following now, and Amazon Workspaces has definitely fallen in place, and then with what Microsoft has done, it's a good time to be in the EUC industry because it provides us all with job security. I believe if you're not in AI, I think that this is a hot spot to be in.
Yeah, someone asked a question earlier, is it the year of VDI? And my answer was, if there ever was a year of VDI, it was 2020 and 2021, because I mean, I remember I was at VMware at the time, but I remember that, we had customers just rushing to increase their capacity in their VDI environment, in their remote access VPNs or their access gateway technologies for VDI stacks, their internet egress bandwidth. Some people moved to DAS because that was much quicker for them to spin up a few thousand users than to, try to order hardware and get it racked and stacked in time. There was obviously hardware shortages globally. So if there ever was a year of VDI, it was 2020 and 2021. I don't think we'll ever see the kind of rapid growth that happened in VDI and DAS as we did in 2020 and 2021, because it was just gangbusters for those 2 years.
I agree. I mean, we all knew we could work from home, but there was not everybody, but we knew it was possible for the majority of a lot of the office workers to work from home. And there was nothing that ever really pushed it. And that was the event that pushed it and said, yeah, it's possible. It's been possible for a long time.
Exactly.
We touched on AI. How do you see? We couldn't let this chat go without spending a little bit of time on AI. How do we see AI really impacting EUC going forward? Maybe even soon in 2024?
I don't know there's going to be a massive impact. I mean, customers are already using AI in their VDI solutions today. A lot of it is happening, frankly, just through the browser. People are going out to ChatGPT and pasting stuff in and out and getting answers. And I think that's got a fairly marginal impact on the VDI and DAS space as a whole. What'll be interesting, I think, is with every vendor embedding AI into their software products, that gives me a moment of pause because, I don't think most VDI or DAS administrators quite know what the impact of those tools is going to be inside of every other application that a user is using. Obviously Microsoft has a big strategy around Copilot, where Copilot is getting embedded into everything, into all the Office products, Teams, Skype, all of it. And anytime you add something that's, churning away in the background, doing searches, answering questions, whatever, there's going to be a CPU hit. Obviously, most of the AI runs in the cloud, so a lot of the processing occurs there, the inference modeling and that kind of stuff. But there is going to be impact from the CPU on the client side UI when you're asking a lot of questions. And in particular, as more and more AI moves to voice and image or video, I think there's going to be a lot of CPU impact increasing by those AI engines. And the question is, are VDI administrators or our DAS administrators ready for the increasing costs from that consumption? I mean, many of us remember Microsoft introducing the Ribbon UI into Office and a bunch of other add-ins they've stuffed into Office over the years that just jumped up the CPU consumption, or when all the browser
needed to add a GPU.
Yeah, when a lot of the browser vendors and Office added GPU support, if you didn't have a GPU, but you had a software emulated one, the CPU impact was astronomical of that change. And you were better off telling the browser, I don't have a GPU, so don't try to do DirectX rendering of this content, just fall back on rasterizing the content. But, people that didn't realize that and had that stuff turned on, I mean, I got a blog, which I've not written on my blog since 2014, but I have a blog from like 2011 or something like that, that talks about the GPU enablement in the browsers and in Office, and it's a stark amount of CPU increase that it's people still view that blog as a reference point, because the browsers and Office still have those GPU settings in them.
Yeah, because we don't know how many apps will be asked to run a local instance of the language, of the chat language and things like that, and that really spikes it. James, we can see that with Stratosphere though, can't we?
We can, yes. Stratosphere does give you, obviously, as we said, most AIs depend on GPUs. So we can monitor all the major GPU vendors, so we can give you insights to how those AI workloads are running.
What's going on with this guy over here in marketing? We actually had this discussion yesterday. One of our guys that's rendering motion GIFs and stuff driven by AI, do we need to allocate him GPU so we can run those more effectively and things like that? So we'll see those.
Or just tell him to do some real work.
Yeah, right. Shawn Massey, is asking what do we think might be some of the big technical innovations in the EUC space? Where might they come from, or anything else emerging in the year ahead or even beyond that?
Yeah, so I would say from my point of view, I think the biggest thing is, organizations are going to continue moving to the cloud quite a bit in the coming years. And part of that is due to some of the uncertainty around VMware Broadcom. Part of that is just a continuing evolution to move things to the public cloud. But I do think customers are going to want to be careful about cloud vendor lock-in. So I think a lot of the innovation in the EUC space is going to come around hybridity. How you can quickly move from on-prem to cloud, or one cloud provider to the other. And some of that is about image management, and some of the vendors already have some tooling there. Some of it is about, decoupling user settings and applications from the base image. I think there's going to be a lot of investment in optimizing workloads for the right fit in a different cloud. And there's obviously a ton of vendors that do that today for server workloads, not as many that focus on it for EUC. But being able to effectively, estimate your public cloud costs and do your power management so that you can idle down resources when they're not in use and spin them up when you need them. I think there's a big focus that's going to happen there. The other thing I would say from a long-term trend perspective, I'm a big believer that VDI and DAS as a platform does not have a long-term longevity. And what I mean by that is, Windows apps are declining. They're not declining rapidly, but they are declining. If you look at the developer pipeline of what apps people are developing today, it's all web and SaaS apps. No one is developing Windows legacy client applications. So, fast forward 10, 15, 20 years in the future, do we still have 30 million Windows apps used by end users in the world? Or is that down to 28 million or 25 million or 23 million? Like, Windows is declining. So if that's the case, my theory long-term is that VDI loses market share and terminal services, or RDSH, increases market share. And for a while, those kind of RDSH was the only game in town. Then VDI came out and it started growing. RDS is still a big component. I think VDI and DAS will shrink over time, and published apps as a service or on-prem RDSH will take over to serve the handful of apps that a user needs, but the rest of their world will exist in their Mac or Chromebook or whatever the case may be, and they'll just remote the handful of Windows apps they need to do their job. And over time, that, of course, becomes less and less.
We talked about different use cases for VDI, not directly, but you and I have discussed it as well, and we did touch upon that today, call centers and things like that. Don't you think those will be the first ones?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, anytime you've got a situation where you've got a primitive use case of a handful of apps, trying to find a web or SaaS-based alternative for 3 to 5 apps is a lot easier than doing it for 4,000 apps or 2,000 apps or whatever. So anytime you either have a small mid-market business, like most small businesses, all cloud SaaS apps, like small businesses today are not building a small business and then immediately using a whole bunch of legacy Windows apps. So that's going to continue to accelerate.
Yeah. The last ones that'll affect, in my mind, will be those knowledge workers we talked about, healthcare, any highly dynamic or secure environment such as the financial industry, A lot of the government and those that have knowledge workers in VDI will be the last to go, just due to the sheer number of Windows apps that won't convert anytime soon.
Yeah, I do think it's going to, like I said, the reason I put that projection out there, 10, 20 years down the future, because, replacing Windows apps is time consuming and costly as well. So I think it's going to happen slowly, but I do think RDSH will emerge as a more prevalent solution to handle those one-off apps rather than giving the user a desktop and a desktop.
Are you surprised here in 2024 that we are as dependent on the Windows desktop as we were? I'm not as much as we were.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. In fact, in the early 2000s, I had a quote where I said, if there's ever a nuclear war, the only thing remaining is going to be Windows apps and cockroaches and Twinkies. But then Twinkies got discontinued for a while. So then I was kind of wrong on that one, but they came back, so it's okay.
I had this discussion with one of the original developer, Profile Unity, back in 2011. I remember having this discussion. That was about the time Google Apps had really become prevalent. You had to have an invitation to get it and all that. And when we all saw Google Apps, we were like, oh my gosh, how much longer does the Windows desktop have left?
Yeah.
And, we sat there contemplating what, and I was like, what do you think? 2020, 2021? Well, that was the spike. So I was wrong.
Hey, I do want to add one quick comment to Shawn Bass's question here. He's saying like we're in the middle of an AI hype cycle. There's no doubt about that. I mean, look at the stock tickers of NVIDIA and Microsoft and every other company involved in AI. It's just crazy right now. But do you think there's going to be an AI backlash because it's everywhere? I think there already is a lot of concerns and challenges around AI in terms of work product that people are producing, if it's theirs, if it's somebody else's, that kind of stuff. I think there's a much bigger issue around AI that companies have not yet fully come to grasp with, and that is, loss of data to these training models, leaching information out. There's been a couple of public cases with Amazon and others where code has been used in training models that was confidential proprietary code.
New York Times one as well, wasn't there? They're suing OpenAI, and OpenAI put out a statement essentially saying, well, we kind of need to violate copyright to train our models, and we'll probably just have to pay you some money or something like,
I think
it was quite a vague statement they put out, but it was like saying, well, we feel we need to break copyright to do this properly.
I think companies, first of all, you can't prevent your users from using AI, because even if you block one AI tool, there's 17,000 others, and your users are going to find a way. You can have a terms of use policy that employees sign that says, I'm not going to leak company confidential data. My belief is organizations need to be prepared with the right data loss prevention tools to be able to stop employees from leaking confidential data, and understand the requirements. And if they need an AI LLM tool that they need to use company confidential data in, then the company's going to have their own private AI infrastructure or their own on-device AI infrastructure to solve some of these things. So I think there's going to be a lot of investment in the next couple of years on trying to solve for that, both the data protection and how do we do some on-device or on private cloud implementation of an LLM. And there's tons of open source models to accomplish that. So
and I think that's why you're seeing Copilot, because it says it only uses the data within your tenant. Whereas if you use OpenAI on ChatGPT, as soon as you upload something, that can go to train their model. So people need to understand.
There is a setting in OpenAI most people don't know about that you can specify whether or not it uses the data you upload for training purposes. So you can turn that off. Most people just don't know how.
That's a good tip, Shawn. That's I wasn't aware of that one myself, actually. So that's good. Cool.
Final question. Do you think the future of EUC is bright for the next 2 years?
I think it's going to be a challenging time over the next 2 years. If EUC does get spun out, we don't know the timetable of when that's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of what ifs for the spun out company. Concerns by customers. Do we need to change vendors? What's going to happen with the Broadcom, relationship and vSphere for desktop? All that kind of stuff. But Citrix has gotten through that process. I don't want to say unscathed, because I think there was some difficult times for them when they went through their private equity process. But I feel like Citrix is actually in a pretty good place today in terms of the innovation in their product is back to a good level. I think they're doing well. They did have a bit of a lull period, but I think they've recovered pretty well. I suspect the same thing will happen for the VMware EUC spinout, that they'll go through a challenging period of time for a year or two, and then they'll emerge, and I think they'll be doing okay.
Yeah, how about the overall EUC?
I think overall EUC is going to be in a good place. Like I said, I think there's going to be a lot of movement that customers are going to have to do in evaluating where to run their workloads. So I think there'll be a lot of changes coming up, but I do think EUC will still be doing well in the next couple of years. It may shift a lot because I think organizations are, as I said, going to start to look at, do we need VDI or DAS for every use case? Can we move some things to like an enterprise browser? Can we move some things to a hosted app service or different things that maybe we don't need a whole VDI desktop for every user? So I think the opportunities to consider different use cases for different users are plentiful right now. And I think organizations are going to start looking at that and say, could we get by with a Chromebook-esque model for some of our users if a majority of the apps they use are web or SaaS? Or could we go to an enterprise browser use case? Or could we go to a model that gives us less dependency on a virtual desktop? Because a virtual desktop, whether on-prem or in cloud, is still a pretty expensive offering. So customers are always looking for ways to cut costs, whether it's data center cost or cloud cost. So I think there's lots of options on the table, and organizations are going to have to evaluate all of those to pick the right one.
Excellent. Any final thoughts?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground today. It was great having you both, and thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks for joining
thanks
us,
everyone for
Shawn.
attending, and
James,
thanks to Shawn for joining us. It's been really good.
Yeah, it was exciting.
My pleasure.
It was a great one. We had great attendance. Thank you to the audience for your participation. We look forward to anything that any of us can help you with. We're easy enough to find online on LinkedIn or otherwise. Kristen, do you have final thoughts for us?
Well, I just want to say thank you all for attending. Shawn, thanks so much for joining us today. Jason and James, thank you as always. Keep an eye out in your email for a link to a recording, and feel free to share it with a colleague. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thanks everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.